event. Now, Mr. Henrique Cymerman was born and raised in Portugal. He came to Israel at the age of 16 and stayed there since then. He's a five-lingual reporter to Israel and the world, a lecturer in the Interdisciplinary Center of Herzliya, won over 15 journalistic awards, including the commendator by King of Spain and President of Portugal, an Angel of Peace given to him for Francis. This is just a short CV that I gave you. Please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and to try to share with you some of my impressions after, I think, 20 years of contact with Hamas leaders and Hamas activists. Well, Hamas in first hand, that's how we called it. The truth is, when we speak about Hamas, it's always polemic. It always raises lots of questions. But I'm trying to give you some information about what I know and what I saw with my own eyes since the very beginning of Hamas as a movement, as an organization. When we speak about Hamas, the Islamic resistance movement, we are talking about a movement that relies on a vast social network called the Dawah, and its military wing, Azadin al-Qassam, is the other leg of the organization. It runs kindergartens, colleges, universities, and organizations assisting the poor, as well as an army composed of thousands of militias, men, women, and children, adolescents that I met in Israeli jails and also in Palestinian jails many times, who are willing to give their lives. On the one hand, they fight illiteracy by teaching the Quran to the entire population. But on the other, they preach, some of them at least, for holy war, preparing rockets, tunnels, and missiles. Hamas won the democratic elections in 2006 in the Palestinian Authority. I remember that day, it was quite a shock for many Palestinians even, through which it murdered, tortured, and expelled dozens of members of the Al-Fatah group from Gaza, carrying out a coup which became in 2007 the first fully Islamic territory in the Arab world. In the West Bank, they are persecuted by the Palestinian Authority, accusing them of trying to carry out another Islamic revolution, even if formally they have a national unity government that in a way is still there, it still exists. Thousands of its men are held and arrested in Israeli jails, and I believe another 600 are arrested in Palestinian prisons. Their social support network and clinics are aimed at helping and giving life to its hundreds of thousands of followers, while its military wing continues the jihad. These are really the two sides of the same coin. Now, it happened one day in 1987 in the Sabra neighborhood in Gaza. 7 people met that day. They were all connected with the Muslim Brotherhood, and they had a very important and historical meeting. One of them was the founder, the spiritual leader, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. The second, his successor, was Abdelaziz Rantisi. The third, Mahmoud al-Zahar, a doctor. The fourth, Ismail Hania, who used to work with Yassin. And there were 3 more. Osama Hamdan, who is now, I believe, in Lebanon. Another one was Sheikh Hassan Youssef, who is the leader of Hamas in the West Bank, and he's now in jail in Israel. And the 7th is the #1 leader of Hamas today, Khalid Mashal, who was until recently in Doha, in Qatar, and I believe he's moving now to Istanbul. I met Sheikh Yassin 14 times, always in his house, in the Sabra neighborhood in Gaza. With Rantisi only twice, 7 times Mahmoud al-Zahar. I spoke with Hania, I never interviewed him, but he was very close to Sheikh Yassin, and that's how I believe he became the leader of Hamas really in Gaza. I met sometimes also Sheikh Hassan Youssef, the leader in the West Bank, who is now in jail, as I said to you, and we speak, even he has a phone in jail, which is quite something strange, but he has, and sometimes we are in contact and we can speak, even being in the Israeli jail. Now, something we must remember, when I speak with Israeli authorities, many times they say to me, and they confess, we knew there is Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza between 1967 and 1987, until the date of the creation of Hamas. We didn't know, or we didn't really pay attention to them because they did nothing against us. They did not attack Israel. So the Israeli army did not meddle with them. But the fact is that in this year, this 20 years period, the number of mosques in Gaza doubled. And the Israelis didn't pay attention because at that time, the real enemy of Israel was Fatah, Al-Fatah, the main nationalistic movement of Palestine. Sheikh Yassin was born in 1937. In a form, he was a kind of a saint. I remember a day when I was in his house after an interview, and Ismail Hania, who was his assistant, told me, "Do you want to film something special?" I said, "What?" He said, "We are going to bath Sheikh Yassin in his wheelchair." He was quadriplegic. And they were really doing a kind of a ritual. And I filmed it, and I saw the kind of relation. It was not only a political leader for them. And with his frail voice, he used to manage to enroll hundreds of thousands of supporters. And I noticed several times people from Azzadin al-Qassam, the military wing, after or before interviews, coming to speak with him, to have his blessing for their operations, before or after, that I don't know exactly, or having a kind of a consultation with Sheikh Yassin in his house. Once he said in 1998, talking about the military wing and the political wing, he said to me, "We cannot separate the wing from the body. If we do so, the body will not be able to fly. Hamas is one body."
الإنسان دائما يعمل وإذا كان مخلوق من العمل فليشك إذا كان صوابا ينظر العمل صحيح ويحتاج إلى تنمية ويعقل فنحن دائما ننظر لأنفسنا وعملنا أقل من الواجب وهدفنا هو النصر أو الشهادة وحدي العقل ويفكر.
Yassin quoted many times the charter of Hamas, which is, everybody speaks about that. He said the main goal is to establish an Islamic State in the whole Palestine. That means West Bank, Gaza, and including the State of Israel. And to follow Sharia, to have Sharia, the Islamic law, as the law, the constitution of that Islamic Palestine. And the explanation was that all this territory is waqf. That means waqf, that means Islamic property, Islamic territory. But let's refer to Dr. Mahmoud al-Zahar, a special important character, I think, is there since that moment, and he's leading Hamas, and he has an important role. He is still a doctor, a pediatrician. I remember him in the 90s in his small clinic in Gaza, really working very, very hard, 17 hours a day, receiving kids from the refugee camps and trying to treat them with their parents. And that was part, as he said to me at that time, I'm talking about maybe 94, 95, in the last century, and he was saying, this is for us our dawah, our social service, our social structure and help we give to the population of Gaza. It's part of our mega social infrastructure, which is one of the two legs of Hamas activity. I remember the day Israeli airplanes bombarded his house in Gaza and killed his two sons, who were members of Azadin al-Qassam, of the military wing. And I met him afterwards, and he always really seemed to me the most, I would say, hawkish, the most decided and extreme in his positions, sometimes even more than Sheikh Yassin himself.
I think Palestine is, as I told you, is not belonging to Palestinian alone. It's belonging to every Muslim, and every Muslim is looking to see how the Israeli defeated from this area. We are going to unify, and this is not our intention. This is not our hope in Palestine or in Hamas. It's present everywhere, in Egypt, in Syria, and even in Indonesia and everywhere. And I think sooner or later we are going to achieve this goal, because the Pan-Islamic State will dissolve and will eliminate all the problems that responsible about the internal Islamic troubles with our oil, borders, wealth, and so on.
Now we must remember that the terrorist attacks, when did they start it really? I remember the first suicide bombing in Tel Aviv. It was in Dizengoff, one of the main streets, and in the square near the street. And I remember that moment because I used to follow very closely Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. I was the last interviewing him, really, 24 hours before his assassination. And I remember that day in 1994, which was some months, October, I believe, so 1 year after the agreement in Oslo and the signing in the White House, the shake handing between Rabin and Arafat. I remember everybody was speaking about a Palestinian state in 5 years. That was really something solid, something possible at that moment, so far away from this moment now, in 94. And I remember how pale was Yitzhak Rabin, the Prime Minister, the moment he saw the 22 dead people in a bus, the number 5 bus. in the center of Tel Aviv, and he was like asking himself, how come? Why? Why are they doing this now? So this is important to remember, because this is an important, I think, element to see. And after that, maybe he was not aware of that, but there were dozens of attacks, of similar attacks. They speak about 200 human bombs. Some of them, I met them because they were still alive. Some of them really decided in the last moment not to do it. Some were in jail, some Palestinians, some adolescents that I met in a very special jail in Hasharon in the north of Israel. I remember kids, 13, 14, 15 years old, that were sent with bombs in their bodies. Just the goal was to kill themselves, to kill Israelis at that moment, in any place, in coffee shops, in buses, in shopping centers, discotheques, or in the streets. The response of Israel through those years was numerous selective assassinations against leaders of Hamas and of the Islamic Jihad, the pro-Iranian group, smaller, the sister of Hamas, I would say, which was also acting in that way. In the beginning of 2004, I remember Sheikh Yassin surprised me. He spoke with me about a ceasefire, a possible ceasefire in the future. That was, if you remember, 4 years after the beginning of the Second Intifada, which is really, I think, the basis of many of the problems we live today in the area. Israelis and Palestinians both lost the faith that peace is possible with the Second Intifada. And I remember Sheikh Yassin saying to me, you know, maybe we'll propose a tahadiyah, a hudna, which is a ceasefire of 10, 20 years, who knows. But on March 22, exactly 11 years ago, 2004, Israel killed Ahmad Yassin, and the explosion in Gaza was immense. A helicopter gunship fired a missile after the morning prayers, and 200,000 people participated in his funeral. In my last interview with him, I asked him how would he like to be remembered, and if he would allow his son to become a martyr, a shaheed, which is a terrorist, in fact, becoming in a way, one of them, a human bomb in Tel Aviv.
Well, to become a shaheed, a martyr?
أنا طول حياتي بدي ربنا يرزقني الشهادة. أنا بطلبها لنفسي، فأنا أرفضها ليه؟
Now, Abdelaziz Rantisi, another doctor, was his successor. But I remember he replaced Yassin, and he received me in his house some days afterwards in Khan Yunis, which is South Gaza, with his family. And he had quite a prophetic statement.
Hamas supporters inside Palestine, hundreds of thousands. No way to be safe from these operations for any Jews living in Palestine. The occupiers, Israeli government, in the past did her best to put an end for Hamas, and they failed. And I believe that no one can put an end for Hamas. They can kill Dr. Rantisi, but they will not kill the idea.
3 weeks later, he was killed by Israel. Three weeks after he became the leader. In 2006, Hamas won the legislative elections, mainly due to the despair of the situation, corruption, ineffectiveness. And I remember that day. But in June 2007, there was a coup d'etat in Gaza. 2 Palestines were created with a real civil war in between them. I remember the head of the prison in Gaza, who was a Fatah officer, Colonel Rifi, who used to take me sometimes to show me how Hamas and Jihad, Islamic Jihad people were there. I remember him calling me from a boat, trying to escape in the sea, and saying to me, you know, we are humiliated. We were 40,000, they were 10,000 Hamas, but they were a smaller militia, but more motivated and trained And that's what happened. Since then, Gaza is led by Hamas. And there is a kind of a media war between the two sides, between Gaza and the West Bank. There is a new TV in Gaza since that moment called Al-Aqsa TV. They have programs for kids. And the media war is very, very important. Here you see Farfur, who is a Mickey Mouse, getting the key of his house from his grandpa, who was killed, and the Secret Service agent from Israel. Simply kills him. This is a children TV, children program.
لقد فقدنا أعز صديق لنا فرفور. لقد استشهد فرفور وهو يدافع عن أرضه.
Now, after the killing of Rantisi, we didn't know really who was the leader. They decided not to publish his name. But I suspected all the time that one of the main leaders, or maybe the leader, was Mahmoud el-Zahar, and the doctor we saw before. And here's what he said to me.
No, big no. We will never accept Israel as a legal existence. We will never accept Israel as owner of 1 square meter. This is an Islamic land. This is belonging to every Muslim. It is an Islamic waqf.
It's a matter of
Rantisi?
tens of years, maybe 20, maybe less, maybe more, and the Israelis will go away.
For leaders like Rantisi, he was always talking about crusades. Israelis were like crusades. They will be here a certain period, and then they will be expulsed. They will be out of this area. Now, there were 3 brutal and dramatic wars in Gaza since then, between Israel and Hamas, with thousands of victims and destruction in Gaza, as you all know, and the Israeli population in the south under siege for years. Really 14,000 rockets since the year 2000 launched to the south of Israel. Kids, a whole generation in both sides that live with fear. But in Gaza, for sure, the number of casualties was much higher, because we're talking about an army fighting against a kind of a militia, a smaller army. In 91, I remember, before really the Madrid conference, I was in Cairo, and I met Dr. Nabil Shah, one of the leaders of the PLO. He's still there working with the Palestinian National Authority. But at that time, it was, for an Israeli, it was illegal to meet someone from the PLO. I remember that properly, because after that interview, I had 1.5 hours, we had a long conversation about the future. And when I came back to Israel, somebody said to me, you know, you can have problems now with police because you did something illegal. Afterwards, the PLO was not a taboo anymore after the Oslo agreements. The question is, can the same happen with Hamas in the future? I asked Sheikh Yassin that question.
طلع حق يطالب بحق واحنا الشعب الفلسطيني أرضنا وبيتنا ومقدساتنا وشعبنا في ظل احتلال إسرائيل. عندما يعود الحق إلى شعبنا ويزول الاحتلال عن أرضنا ووطننا، كل شيء بعد ذلك ممكن.
2006, I arrived for the first time to Sheikh Hassan Youssef, the leader in the West Bank, the one who is now in jail. And I remember his son received me. He was working with his father. His son, his name was Musab Youssef. And he looked at me, to me, different. I remember he told me, you also from Spain. Have you been in Ibiza? I was there in summer and it was great. I never heard a Hamas leader saying to me something like this, so I was quite surprised. Afterwards, we had a huge interview with him. I remember it was an incredible interview because he was, for me, I saw for the first time a really pragmatic or more pragmatic leader in Hamas. Then we all knew that Mossad was an Israeli agent working really for the Shin Bet, for the security services. Why? I asked him many times afterwards, recently. There is a film that I recommend to you, The Green Prince, the son of Hamas. And he told me, because I couldn't bear terrorism. I couldn't accept these kind of activities. So that's why I went with the Israeli agents and I gave them information about that. But the fact is that Mossad, in his house, I remember he brought me to his father, and his father told me for the first time, you know, I can't tell you Israel doesn't exist, because we look there, 15 minutes from here in Ramallah, and we see another country. There is a certain Israel. But I asked him, Sheikh Yusuf, do you think there is a possibility of recognizing Israel? And it was the first time I saw somebody saying, at least Israel is a reality.
You said to me some years ago, before you went to jail, 6 years ago, I think, you said to me that Hamas one day could accept the existence of Israel. Do you still believe that's possible?
يعني الآن حماس حينما تطرح الهدنة مع الاحتلال الإسرائيلي هي يعني تقر بواقع إسرائيل إنه إسرائيل موجودة لاحظ، لكن مسألة الاعتراف وعدم الاعتراف هذا شيء آخر، يعني كلام آخر. لكن هو الهدنة حينما تعقد بين حماس وبين إسرائيل ما معنى ذلك؟ إنه طرف يعيش هنا وطرف يعيش هناك، باختصار. هذا الذي قلته وأقوله اليوم وأقوله في المستقبل، يعني ليس كلام جديد. هذه هي هدنة بين طرفين، هدنة بيننا حماس وهدنة بين الاحتلال الإسرائيلي. إذن هو حماس تقر بذلك وإسرائيل أيضا تقر بذلك.
It's too soon for more, apparently. But you know, I understood one of his roles in jail is to dialogue. Jail is a place where Israelis and Palestinians have a kind of a continuous dialogue. And he was one of the personalities in Hamas involved in the Gilad Shalit interchange of prisoners. You remember, 1,000 Palestinians were released, and he was there also for that goal. But apparently the extremist view, like Mahmoud al-Zahar, is still the majority in Hamas leadership. In 2005, Israel decided, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, unilaterally withdraw from Gaza, dismantling settlements and military bases. Hamas continues investing many of their scarce resources in the rockets industry, in the tunnels that cost hundreds of millions. Now, Israel and Egypt, also President Sisi, press them very strongly from the two sides. The population feels in a way like living in the biggest open jail in the world, but at the same time, they feel they are also hostages of Hamas and of Hamas policy. The small and old Christian community feels very uncomfortable. Many Christians in Gaza are trying to escape to Bethlehem, to the West Bank, to other places, mainly in Christmas when they have a permission to go to the West Bank, and they don't go back to Gaza because they feel that Hamas is after them and they don't feel comfortable there. The Qatari government asked the Hamas leader, Khalid Mashal, to leave. And it was very recently to leave to Turkey. And Mashal said something which is quite surprising. He said to a journalist recently that Hamas Charter is a piece of history and no longer relevant, but cannot be changed for internal reasons. Hamas is 28, and the question is if it will transform itself, putting an end to the rejection of Israel and the promotion of violence. I spoke this morning with a sociologist in Bet Sahur near Bethlehem, Dr. Nabil Koukali, and I asked him for the last polls in Palestine if there would be elections. He told me today, it's published, the Public Opinion Center of Bet Sahur, in the last poll, Fatah would win the elections with 33%, but Hamas would get 22%, having really Fatah a biggest majority in Gaza than in the West Bank. That means that Hamas is supported by more than 1 million people, which is also important. US Special Envoy Dennis Ross said recently that the international community and the pragmatic Arab world, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, countries in the Gulf, they should put Hamas on a position of having to choose. To govern successfully by transforming itself, or fail and be discredited. You know, they say the word inshallah, and I don't know if you know it, but they say that an American in Egypt is really surprised because everybody is saying inshallah, inshallah, and he asks, what is inshallah? With God help, really. And somebody said to him, if you come to me and you say inshallah, we meet again, and I say inshallah, I don't really mean that. But if you come to me and you say, we hope one day we'll have peace, and I say inshallah, that means really what I mean. So he said, I'm confused. How should I know if it's this inshallah or the other inshallah? He said, inshallah, one day you'll understand. Thank you very much.